And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO at Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Martha Lawrence. She's got a new book that has just been released. She is a former editor at Simon & Schuster, and she's been the executive editor at Blanchard and has collaborated with Ken Blanchard for more than 20 years on many, many books. But the book that she's doing now, as I can see in her on the video here, looks like she's the author, right? I see her name and it's called Catch People Doing Things Right. So first tell us about this book, and then I want to go down memory lane a little bit with you, Martha.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thanks for having me on, Peter. I love the Leveraging Thought Leadership podcast. You've got a lot of great stuff. I think you're one of the smartest guys around. You know books. Yeah.
Right? Wow, we can end now just to starve a cold, defeat an
No,
ego.
yeah.
Thank
I've
you.
been in publishing since the early 80s, and you are really on top of what's happening in publishing right now. So it's really fun to be with you. So about this book, yes, I have worked with Ken Blanchard, who does your audience know who Ken Blanchard is? Should I go into that a bit?
If they don't, then shame on them.
Okay. Well, he's, as the American Management Association said, he's one of the foremost leadership authorities of the century.
Yeah.
He has just really influenced so many people, and we can talk about that more. But I decided to write this book after working with him for so long because not only is he an amazing human being who's published 70 books and started a global leadership organization and really changed the way that people think about leadership, but he actually walks the talk. He
Yep.
is the guy who does the stuff he teaches. So there's so many biographies today about people who
Yep.
are innovative, but they're not necessarily great role models. Maybe they're kind of,
I'd
not
say
great. Yeah.
somewhere between psychotic and narcissistic. There's tends to be
Narcissistic.
yeah.
Yeah,
There aren't a
exactly.
lot of books about nice guys that are really just good people. Maybe they're boring reads. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. And, when this book first hit the publisher, it was like, nobody's this nice. And I used to write mystery novels. So it's like no conflict, no interest, right? And so I really had to dig down with my editor. Well, what is Ken Blanchard's dark side? And they say your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. The dark
Right.
side is too nice, not enough boundaries.
Uh,
He would be penniless if it weren't for the people around him because he gives everything away. He literally gives away tens of thousands of dollars to people who need
mhm.
it just because out of the goodness of his heart. So that's actually a dark side, but we can get into that later.
We should all have such a dark side.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to. So now let's go back in time. So you've been in the publishing space forever. You've written a bunch of books. Give me just a sense of, and obviously being inside of Blanchard and an executive editor and the relationship with Baracola BK, the publisher. Tell me what's different now than writing a book you might have written, say, 20 years ago, in terms of what's the same and what's different.
Oh, well, what's really different, we can go back 40 years. Let's go back 40 years
Okay.
to, the One Minute Manager, which Ken is
Sure.
probably most famous for co-authoring The One Minute Manager. When that book came
Oh,
out
wait,
in nine
that's probably sold, what, 20 plus million copies? Or,
exactly, 20 plus million copies around the world, but when that came out in 1982, the media landscape was so different. I mean, there were these
sure.
6 major publishers, right? And when you hit the New York Times bestseller list back in 1982,
Right.
which it did, and it stayed there for 3 years, everybody knew about that book because it wasn't a fractured media landscape. I mean, he was on Good Morning
Well,
America. Yeah.
stay there for a minute. So
Okay.
back in the day, when you hit the list, right, it
Right.
stayed for 3 years, not all books. Right now, if you do the data, it's like 1.7 weeks. And then the question is why? Because everybody's trying to jump the
Um,
algorithm and buy their way on the list and blah, 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 blah. And I think, the reality is that was a great book and there was a marketing engine and a PR engine behind it and it stuck. People read it and they said, "Oh my, I got to buy 10 of these for my team." And I don't think we were using viral then in 1982.
Not at all.
Right? But there was this organic virality that you would tell a good friend, "I just read this book. I think you'd like it."
The pass along thing. Yeah, absolutely. And so you were able to dominate the public consciousness, but right now it's a totally different landscape. the book still continues to sell as the new One Minute Manager. It's just one of those evergreen books that it has timeless, simple to apply truths in it that
And I'll
people.
sound like an old whatever, because I sort of am. If you're out there and you don't have it on your bookshelf and you haven't, buy it now. It's one of the, there's like 10 or 15 books that should be on everybody's library, and One Minute Manager is absolutely one of them.
Yeah, and it takes an hour to read. It's 100 pages and it's a story. It's not a dry, boring business book, which is, I think, one of the reasons why it was so successful. Because at that time, business books, they weren't even really a category. I mean, people didn't
Yeah.
really read them. And along comes Spencer and Ken, and they have this easy to read story that's a pass along book. So okay, so that's 40 years ago. Now let's go 20 years ago. Or
Yep.
I was publishing mystery novels back in the mid 90s, and back in those days, we would get on an airplane and go to different cities. I would do
Yeah.
author tours, and
Yeah.
and I'd appear in a city and do a signing at a bookstore and, do local media that way. Now, podcasting, baby, it's the name of the game. This is how we publicize books now. So,
People ask how come, because I get this question quite frequently from clients. Well, how come people don't do book tours? And I'm like, it's a math problem. Let's do some math here. If we're going to pick 10 cities for you to go to the Barnes and Noble and the independent bookstore, what's it going to cost? How much of your time, money to stay in a hotel, travel, whatever? Who's going to show up, and are you going to sell any books? And he answer,
yeah,
math is really bad. But you
it
might
took
want to do one in your hometown for personal reasons, or the Fifth Avenue, Barnes and Noble, whatever. There's a handful that are sort of check the box ones that you may want to do, but the days of hitting a road show and doing 20, 30 cities in 6, 8 weeks, those days are over, because it just doesn't make sense. And why not? We're sitting here on a podcast. You could do 20 of these in a day.
Yeah, and in fact, I have been doing a lot every day, and it's just so much more efficient. One of my old friends from the mystery writing days, Harlan Coben, who writes these big
Yeah.
thrillers, and he just did a book with Reese Witherspoon. They co-authored a book together. Now they're doing a multi-city tour. People buy
Sure.
tickets to that, but honestly, it's kind of, I don't think they're doing it for monetary reasons, probably just to nurture the fans. So yeah, you're right, Peter. It doesn't make sense.
Yep. Yep. So what else is different? So that being said, what are the things that are, you mentioned podcasting. So you mentioned two things, right? So book tours don't work. Podcasting kind of replaces that. What other things are different? Because I was just thinking as you were talking before, if somebody were to market the One Minute Manager today, they'd probably market it as the 1 hour read, right? Because brevity is
It's exactly.
is important today.
Well, Ken, when that book came out, there was no social media. It was all about getting the print media and getting the, TV, radio, and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. Now, I mean, authors, the dirty little secret in publishing is that authors have always been required to do the business side of publishing. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but there was an assumption back when I started publishing books that the publisher's publicity department would help that author get all those bookings and do all that stuff. And they did. And if you were part of the A list, which I was fortunate enough to be, I did have that support from the publisher. If I had known then what I know now about how much more I could have turbocharged my book sales by, I did hire my own publicist, but it's really about, it's a business. Being an author is a business. No question about it. So today
Well, so stay there a minute. It's a business, and then, but the next question on that is, what's the business that you're in? So a lot of people think, well, but being an author is a business. The book is probably the product, because that's a logical, rational statement, right? And I would say yes, and right. So it's really, really difficult if the book is the only product. So when you think about a book, you think about sort of what are the line of businesses that you're opening that are derivatives of the intellectual property and the ideas and such that live in the book. The book is one, whatever SKU, as they would say.
Well, it's the business card for your business. It depends on what you're doing, though. I mean, the book I have written, this is a biography. It's a scholarly work, although hopefully it reads more like a novel. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback that it moves along like a novel, and it's written as a narrative nonfiction. But if you're a biographer or a literary person, you really do have to have a brand, though. That is going to be
Yeah.
your brand, and more publishers are going with a known brand. So even if you're, there used to be authors thought, well, I don't want to get my hands dirty in that awful business world. I am just
Yeah.
a pure intellectual, and
Right.
nobody has that luxury these days. So there's branding of your book covers. Can people recognize your brand? I mean, I think
Yeah.
Ken Blanchard, one of the reasons he was so successful is because he did have a brand. He wrote these very accessible books, even though he comes from a background. He was a university professor for many years before he became a best-selling author and started a leadership development company. He was just such a
Yeah. So
compelling speaker.
stay there again. Because right now there's a bunch of really, really good, what I would call sort of, rock star academics, the Brene Browns, the Adam Grants, et cetera, the Heath brothers, whatever, that have crossed into sort of mainstream notoriety. And, one of the things they have in common is they don't write like academics. They write books people want to read. And I think people forget the history of Ken is that, he's a recovering academic. And if you were to read the 1 Minute Manager and say, what type of person wrote that? One would not typically say an academic.
No,
And that an insulting way to Ken is just so approachable and so logical and so presentable and easy to consume.
well, see, this is why I love your podcast, Peter, because you know a lot of stuff. And exactly. And in fact, Ken's academic friends, they were mortified by the 1 Minute Manager. They're like, you can't publish this. It makes you look like an idiot, I mean, you have so much more theory and substantive knowledge behind you. But funny you mentioned Brene Brown because she said somebody handed Brene Brown the 1 Minute Manager when she got
Right.
her first management job in the 1990s at AT&T. And she said, that book shaped the way I live, lead, and parent. The 1 Minute Manager, Ken was talking about love and leadership way before any of us. So, this generation's superstars kind of took a page out of the Ken Blanchard playbook about, being more casual, being more accessible, talking like a real human being. And that's what's different. And Ken really was on the cutting edge of all that.
Great. So what does success look like for you, right? So I'm going to talk about you as an author, right? There's lots of things you could have done in the last year or two, but this is something you chose to do, right? And obviously you have the subject matter expertise and the relationship with Ken. What would you like to happen as a result of this?
What does success look like? Well, as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, it's already a success because I got a ringside seat to one of the greatest leadership thinkers of the last century. And what I wanted to do was capture his life
Yes.
so that people would understand where this came from. And so that's already, to me, I've already accomplished that. A year from now, I would just want other people to understand, to pass along what Ken Blanchard has been teaching. I think it's a message that really needs to be talked about today. The idea of people are as important as results.
Mhm.
The best leadership is servant leadership. Your job if you're in a leadership position, your job is to serve, not to be served. And that's a message that I think needs to get out there. So that's
So
what I
let me
really.
play with that a little bit. So one is what I would call sort of the intrinsic reward. Like the reward happened before you got your first hard copy in your hand. The joy of writing, and you're beaming as you're saying that. So I love that because to get a book across the finish line is a lot of work and blood, sweat, and tears, whatever. But when it's at least partly a passion project, that's really important. The other piece that you said that that it's representative and of what servant leadership is. And there's so much going on today, not just in publishing, but in business and everything else where, oh, well, AI is going to change this and AI is going to change that. And that is true. And I am not a Luddite, but the ethos or the principles of servant leadership are not something that we're going to have to worry that AI is going to take our job because it's a better person than we are. Well, or if it does, then you're probably a pretty crappy person. Well, but it's but like, these are timeless, right? And I,
These Absolutely. These are timeless principles that he's teaching. And no matter what technology we develop, it's always going to be changing. Humans are going to always have new technology. We've been talking about how things have changed in the past 40 years, but the point is that it's all about people. What we're doing, the people are what's important. And that's really what Ken's message was, and is that, let's not forget the people piece.
And I want to sort of go a little bit behind the scenes because I've known Ken for a long time. He's been on the show at least once, maybe twice, and Vicky and a bunch of other folks at Blanchard. One of the things that's always shocked me about, maybe it shouldn't shock me, but it surprised me about Blanchard as a company is how many people that I talk to there that have been there forever, right? When we talk about most organizations are fighting with talent retention and turnover, and you talk to people that are, I've been here 26 years, 30 years, and you're like, holy cow, and these are
True.
wicked smart people that could be doing anything they want, but they want to be there.
Well, that's what's incredible. And I think that's the proof in the pudding, is that Ken started this company in 1979 with this cadre of super, super smart people from the University of Massachusetts and Cornell University.
Yeah.
And those original founding associates stayed with the company. The company is now 45 years old.
Right.
We've lost a couple of them, sadly, have passed away in the last couple of years, but they've stayed with the Blanchards. And people they created a culture. What was so cool about the fact that they created an organization rather than just being business consultants is that they had the same problems their clients were having. They were growing an organization. How do you get from 6 million to 60 million? You're going to have all those growing pains along the way. And they put into practice the principles about the culture is important. People are important,
Well, and I think the other thing that was done was that in most organizations that are built around the brain or the brand or the IP of a thought leader, the thought leader is the product. The thought leader is the rock star. The thought leader is the thing. And what I've always seen from the Blanchard Group is that it's all about the IP. And, not that it's not about Ken, but I don't think there's somebody expecting today to be sitting in a program in Cleveland for Ken to actually walk in with his briefcase and teach it. They might not even know who he is. And that's, to an egomaniac, that's like a nightmare. But that's the beauty of it, right? Is that it will live in perpetuity.
I love that, Peter. That's I've never thought of it that way, but that's exactly right. And that's the thing. Ken does not have a big ego. I had been wanting to write this book since like 2005. As soon as I found out that not only was he this incredible author, but that he was actually such a nice guy and I saw his life and I'm like, somebody has to write this story. But he didn't particularly want a book written about himself. He doesn't need the credit. He's happy to share the credit. And people often ask him, you've published 70 books. How come so many of them are co-authored? His mom used to say, don't you want to write a book all by yourself and have your name in big letters on the cover? And he said, Mom, one of my highest values is learning.
Yeah.
If I write a book with someone else, not only is it going to be more fun, he's a huge extrovert and loves people, but I'm going to learn something. So, no ego. And you're right. That is why the company is thriving because it's not all dependent on Ken Blanchard. Although it has passed on to his son, Scott Blanchard is now the CEO. And Scott used to think his dad was kind of, maybe a little touchy-feely, overly optimistic, didn't really believe some of these principles actually worked in the real world. And then he did a bunch of research, really hardcore research about, do my dad's principles work for the bottom line? And discovered that, in fact, they do. You take care of your people. That takes care of
there are very, very few. I would say Stephen M. R. Covey clearly took over the Covey organization.
Yes.
Tom Ziegler over at Zig's organization since Zig passed.
Yes.
It's not typically thought about as a family business, but there are a few really special cases where it is, and that's pretty cool. Anyway, this has been awesome. I appreciate your time. I'm so glad you wrote the book. I can't wait to read it. And thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Peter. I've really enjoyed our conversation. You're such a smart guy, and I appreciate being on the show.
Thank you.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.